Participants, colleagues, on behalf of the co-hosts of this session, UN Environment Programme, UN ESCAP, and UN Human Rights, I'm delighted to welcome you to this session on plastic circularity through responsible business conduct to realize the right to a healthy environment. Thank you very much for joining us. Plastic waste and pollution are threatening ecosystems and livelihoods across Asia. Increasing volumes of plastic waste have led to environmental, social, and health impacts, particularly for vulnerable communities. Asia is both a hotspot for plastic pollution, as well as a range of innovative measures designed to curb plastic pollution. Businesses are increasingly finding innovative ways to reduce plastic waste and transition to a more resource-efficient and circular economy, while new solutions are evolving to improve collection, recycling, and capture of plastic waste leakage. The protection of the environment and ecosystems, of course, contributes to the fulfillment of human rights and human well-being, including health, safe, clean, healthy, and sustainable environment, an adequate standard of living, and decent work. And these interlinkages between the environment and human rights have been clearly demonstrated throughout the forum so far. In moving towards circular value chains for plastics, business strategies should be informed by holistic assessments of social and environmental impacts across value chains, factoring in the rights and gender dimensions in both challenges and opportunities. A systemic approach to achieving a more sustainable value chain can contribute to building more prosperous and resilient economies and inclusive societies. So today, in this panel, we are exploring what a rights-based approach to the plastic value chain looks like. And we are discussing what actions are needed to help businesses, governments, and communities shift away from business as usual to inclusive, circular, and more sustainable and resource-efficient plastics economy. Today, we're going to hear from a panel of 6 experts. I am joined by representatives from academia, from business, and from civil society. We have 4 panelists here in the room, and we're joined by 2 panelists remotely. So these panelists are Sarah Sack from the Schulich School of Law, Dalhousie University, Nat Achichatkan, who is the CEO of Trash Lucky. I'm joined by Mr. Vivek Sisla, who is the Beauty and Wellbeing R&D Head from Southeast Asia Unilever, from Aratai Nok Pongratam, who is from the Thai Environment Foundation, Dominic Thompson from the Environmental Justice Foundation, and Dr. Napon Popattanchai from Thammasat University Faculty of Law. I'm going to address a question to each of our speakers, and I'm going to kindly and perhaps forcefully, if I need to, ask them to stick to a maximum of 10 minutes to try and allow time for questions and discussion in the room as well. So with that, let us first commence the panel, and I want to turn to Sarah. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us, especially at the difficult hours that you are connecting. Sarah, can you please provide an overview of the human rights-based approach to the plastics value chain? How can training for actors in the plastics value chain support business action to realize the right to a healthy environment? Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Georgina, for that kind introduction. And I should note that my internet connection may be unstable. I hope it isn't, and I will continue. So with regard to the human rights-based approach, the work that I have been doing has involved supervising a team of researchers at Dalhousie University to develop trainings on a human rights-based approach to the plastic value chain as part of the Sea Circular initiative on reducing marine litter by addressing the management of the plastic value chain in Southeast Asia. So from our perspective, the critical first step to overcoming the plastics challenge is to understand the impacts at each stage of the plastic life cycle. Actors often focus on the waste management and disposal stages, and so fail to fully grapple with the human rights impacts arising at each stage. In our trainings, we draw upon reports by the UN Environment Program, as well as the 2021 report on plastics by the Special Rapporteur on Toxic Substances, to clarify the impacts at each stage through a human rights lens. So beginning with extraction and refinement of fossil fuels, this is the first stage of the linear cycle for 99% of current virgin plastics. And local environmental justice issues, as well as global climate justice issues and associated human rights abuses, are well known in relation to the extraction of fossil fuels. Yet this stage and these impacts are often not thought of as connected to the plastics challenge. Production is the second stage of the linear cycle and contributes to air, water, and soil pollution, creating toxic places where people work, live, and play. And without effective environmental regulation, this leads to violations of the human rights of workers, communities, and children, among others. The addition of toxic chemical additives and microplastics during the production stage can exacerbate these impacts. But the production stage offers immense opportunities to reduce harmful plastics through product design and reduction or elimination of plastic packaging, for example. Transportation is the third stage of the linear cycle and was widely ignored until the MV Express Pearl sank and released millions of plastic pellets, contaminating fisheries and marine life along the Sri Lankan coastline. This and commonplace smaller scale incidents violate rights to healthy and sustainable fisheries and healthy ecosystems and biodiversity, among others. Use, consumption, and waste generation is often seen as the fourth stage of the plastic cycle. Consumers experience daily exposure to toxic compounds in plastics through skin contact and ingestion of microplastics and toxics in water and the food chain, as well as through packaging contact. Low-income communities may be marketed low-quality plastics that disproportionately expose them to toxic effects, and women are often disproportionately impacted when plastics act as endocrine disruptors. But again, attention to product design can reduce both the amount of plastics in the use stage, as well as their toxic impacts on human rights. The waste management stage receives the most attention due to statistics that suggest only 9% of plastics are effectively recycled. Waste management raises key concerns for informal sector waste pickers, often women and children, who play a key role in global plastics recycling efforts, yet are particularly vulnerable to health risks and human rights harms. This may be due to a lack of access to protective gear, but more broadly, to a failure to ensure these crucial workers have access to sustainable livelihoods. And furthermore, there's a concern that current plastics recycling practices risk concentrating toxic additives, generating new hazardous products that further violate rights to health and a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And finally, there's the disposal stage of the linear plastic cycle. Due to a failure to adopt circular product design and a lack of support for viable recycling processes, a large percentage of plastics are either put in landfill, dumped, leaked into nature, or incinerated, including, I should note, those illegally exported into Asia. Each of these pose severe risks to local community health, whether due to dangerous emissions from landfill, air pollution, or contamination of the marine environment, including through breakdown into microplastics, which then make their way back up the food chain and are ingested by coastal communities dependent upon local fisheries for food. This is all to say that all stages of the plastics life cycle must be understood through a human rights lens. You also asked whether the training of actors in the plastic value chain is crucial to support business action to realize the right to a healthy environment. And this has very much been the focus of our trainings. The trainings we've developed are informed by a theory of change, which aims through knowledge and awareness to make businesses and governments into change agents who view environmental human rights defenders and workers, among others, as allies in the transition to a toxic-free circular economy. So we've developed 3 training modules. The first explores the human rights impacts at each stage of the linear plastic cycle, as I've just briefly described. The second training module introduces the component parts of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment as a framework for deeper understanding of plastics harms. While the third module introduces the UN guiding principles on business and human rights and related tools, including the work of the UN Global Compact, the OECD, and the ILO. The aim here is to reveal opportunities for businesses and governments to develop critical understandings of responsible business plastic action. And importantly, through collaboration with the UN Environment Program and local stakeholders in Indonesia and the Philippines, we've also developed an integrated local case studies that encourage reflection upon the trainings in specific case contexts. I'll briefly note that a crucial learning from Module 2 is the interdependence of the component parts of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. The right may be understood substantively as guaranteeing rights to clean air, clean water, a safe climate, non-toxic places to live, work, and play, healthy and sustainable food systems, and healthy ecosystems and biodiversity. And I note that the current and previous Special Rapporteur on the Environment have clarified the content of each of these components of the right in numerous recent reports. However, substantive rights are only likely to be effective if procedural rights are also guaranteed. And this is well elaborated in the 2018 Framework Principles on Human Rights and the Environment. These include rights to information, impact assessment and precaution, as well as freedom of expression and association, and rights to participate in environmental decision-making, and to free, prior, and informed consent for local and Indigenous communities, as well, ultimately, as the right of access to justice in the event of harm. Crucially, the work of environmental human rights defenders must be supported, and the responsibility to do so rests with both governments and businesses. And the third component of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is the importance of cross-cutting attention to equity and vulnerability. And this includes intersectional attention to the rights of women and gender diverse persons, those living in poverty, marginalized and racialized communities, as well as the disabled, elderly, and especially children. And workers, whether formal or informal, also have cross-cutting rights protections that should be understood through an intersectional lens. These rights and their interdependence are relevant to each stage of the plastics life cycle and should inform decisions around product design as much as waste management and disposal. Now, I'll briefly note that the third module delves into the UN guiding principles and related guidance, including clarifications from the work of the working group, such as the Gender Lens report, as well as the guidance on ensuring respect for human rights defenders. And I note this report calls for states and businesses to view human rights defenders as allies and experts in protecting people and the planet. The UN Global Compact offers its 10 principles, as well as new sustainable oceans principles. And the OECD's responsible business conduct tools and risk-based due diligence framework is very useful as well. We draw learnings on chapters on disclosure, the environment, employment and industrial relations, as well as consumer interests, among others. And we also consider the ILO's decent work and just transition agendas, which view workers as agents of change in the transition to sustainable economies. This third module provides businesses with the human rights due diligence tools essential to enable respect for the component parts of the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. And we use case studies to illustrate how these learnings can be applied in product design, waste management, and disposal, and more generally, how to align circularity in supply chains with human rights due diligence. We also consider emerging developments that anticipate liability and accountability for plastic harms. And we ground all of these in case studies, including on topics such as plastic credits, the sachet economy, and waste incineration. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share this, and I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And you've really well demonstrated the clear linkages between human rights and each of those stages of the plastics value chain and across the plastics cycle as well. And the importance of looking at cross-cutting vulnerabilities and ensuring that the procedural elements of the right to a healthy environment are upheld when looking at a human rights-based approach to plastics. You also mentioned some interesting statistics that only 9% of plastics are actually recycled, and the importance of organizations that are working to establish sustainable livelihoods in the informal recycling sector, which leads me perfectly to our next speaker, Nat. So Nat, as a business operating within the Thai recycling industry, how are you supporting responsible business practices and plastic circularity?
Thank you, Georgina, and good morning, everybody. So Trash Lucky supports plastic circularity by building a smart recycling bin infrastructure that connects post-consumable recyclables with independent waste collector. So by recycling into the smart bin, consumer earns lucky draw tickets to win exciting prizes like gold and shopping vouchers. And when the bin is full, it will alert our partner waste collector to come and collect and buy the deposit recyclables. So it's basically a two-sided market. On the one side, there's consumers. And if you live in Thailand, you know that Thai people love lucky draw. 20 million Thais spend 8.3 billion US dollar a year on the lottery. And that's only the legal lottery alone. So if you count for the illegal one, that number is probably higher. But however, they don't like to sort waste. So we're basically gamifying it. We're using big lucky draw prizes as incentive for people to recycle. Now, on the other side, there's informal waste collector who basically drive around the city announcing on loudspeaker that they're looking to buy recyclables without knowing the volume or where exactly the materials are ahead of time. So our smart bin basically allows them to know exactly when to go, how much materials to be collected, and where exactly to go to. So therefore, saving them time, saving them gas money, and therefore increasing their profit. So basically, we're trying to formalize the informal recycling infrastructure here across Southeast Asia. Now, as for supporting responsible business practice, Trash Lucky has become a voluntary EPR platform for brands to support the 3 R's: education and incentivize consumers to recycle. We have worked with brands such as SIG Combi Block to run school recycling program and recycle UHT cartons. We have worked with Thai unions to run office recycling programs and convert PET bottles into PPEs that were donated to healthcare workers. And Coca-Cola, whom we're now working with for a second year to give away 2 million baht worth of prizes for lucky consumers who recycle with the 6-month campaign. So basically, you can win iPhones, you can win gold, like you can actually convert recyclables like plastic bottles, milk bottles, milk jugs, all these things can actually now be converted into gold. So trash to gold, literally. And all those things will be recycled and of course, like supporting the Thailand's biocircular and green economy as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Nat. And I was mentioning to Nat that one of the Trash Lucky recycling bins is actually located at my daughter's school. And so I have participated, not won anything yet. And so now we want to turn to a different scale, I guess, of work in the private sector, and to Vivek. Who is the Wellbeing R&D Head of Southeast Asia for Unilever. What would be, in your opinion, the most impactful interventions at corporate level and at the policy level in Thailand and ASEAN that will make the most impact in creating circular plastics economies? Over to you, Vivek.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Georgina. Thank you for the opportunity. A quick introduction to Unilever. Hopefully, most of you know us. Our products reach about 3.5 billion consumers every day. We work with 1.8 million retailers and small shoppers. We work with 800,000 farmers, small farmers around the world, which is to say that we have a wide footprint, which is an opportunity and a responsibility for us. Our corporate purpose is to make sustainable living commonplace. And as part of our corporate purpose, we've taken far reaching, ambitious goals and made commitments on environmental pollution, on water quality, air quality, and also on plastics. We can look at the plastics problem in different ways. Today, I want to focus on one way of looking at the plastics problem, which is to say that plastic waste, according to one report, has about $60 billion worth of value, which is untapped. If we could recover value from plastic waste, Kun Nat talked about plastic gold, converting to gold, it can pay for not only the entire circular economy that we want to build, but also ensure the right kind of human rights and dignity in the process. Unilever is fully committed to the UN guidelines on human rights. We publish an annual report talking about not only our steps towards compliance, but also proactive measures to go beyond. In terms of plastics, what commitments have we made? So in simple terms, we have two major commitments. The first is to reduce our virgin plastic footprint by 50% by the year 2025. This is a tough ask. I work in research and development, and my teams are working feverishly over the next couple of years to try and meet these targets. We also have a second goal, which is to collect and process more plastic than we put out into the environment, because we want to create essentially a circular by design solution that covers both the plastic management within our system, but also outside our system. What have we done so far in the last few years in terms of plastic? So we have a program called Less Plastic, Better Plastic, and No Plastic. As part of this program, we try and use less plastic by design at the beginning of every project that we undertake. And our goal is at least 15% reduction by direct plastic reduction design. The second area is use of better plastic, or let's say post-consumer recycled plastic in our packaging. We are the first company in Southeast Asia to have used recycled plastics, at least 25% in a lot of our personal care and home care brands. So brands like Breeze, brands like Sunlight, Dove, Sunsilk, all carry a certain content of recycled plastic already over the last couple of years. We would like to expand and accelerate this further. The other step we are taking is doing a lot of pilot models at this stage on what we call no plastic or minimal plastic systems, which includes refill models in Southeast Asia and other parts of the world. So that's a bit of our progress on the plastic reduction journey. On the collection side, we are also doing several pilots around the world on looking at different collection models that we can scale up in partnership with other agencies and our peer groups. For example, in India, we have a collection pilot with the UNDP, which is doing about 5,000 tons of plastic per year, which also has a part of the program to improve the livelihoods and the lives of waste pickers involved in the process. So this is a joint collaborative project. We're learning a lot from it. We intend to do more in Bangladesh after this and in other parts of the world. That's one example. In Thailand, we're working with the private-public partnership to do collection pilots with the right health and hygiene aspects covered as part of the collection process. So this is some of the progress we are making as one company, as Unilever, along with our partners. But how can we accelerate this and make a much bigger impact? We're working with all the partners in the multi-stakeholder ecosystem. Our view is this. We already have the beginnings of policy development in Southeast Asia under different types of EPR policies in each country, so extended producer responsibilities. We feel that this can be, along with the right regulatory framework, help drive a circular economy in a shorter time frame. How would we go about doing it? There are some key elements to how we should approach the EPR and the regulations. In our view, the first thing is to look at it as extended participant responsibility, which means every participant in the value chain of plastic contributes to the EPR system. So involvement of all players is important. The second thing there is that we need to have physical investment in infrastructure for collection and sorting. One of our big learnings has been, even as we try to increase recycled content of plastic in our products, the availability of the right infrastructure and the ease for consumers to go and access it is critical to bringing circularity to scale. Part of this actually is to harmonize systems. The number of bins we use, the kind of bins that we use, the technology used, for example, QR codes to let consumers know where the nearest collection points are, or in fact, the underlying IT systems that manage the entire material flow. There's great opportunity to harmonize, and we believe that harmonization will drive scale. Kunnat talked about the informal sector. We think that's critical. The informal sector does a lot of plastic collection, but is not fully regulated, is not fully transparent. How can we include the informal sector in the EPR policy by design? The second part is the regulations. So what kind of regulatory frameworks would need to be in place to drive a more effective and scaled up EPR? The first, of course, is minimum participation by all players, as I mentioned, but also minimum infrastructure development for collection points, sorting points, and the right licenses in place. The second is what we call eco-modulation, essentially saying that if you have more environmental friendly packaging, for example, your packaging is 100% recyclable or uses recycled content, then there's an incentive for that, or a disincentive for not having eco-friendly packaging as part of the EPR fee structure. We also believe that a minimum mandatory 25% post-consumer recycled content will help both in two ways. One is to drive greater acceptance of PCR. Very few players using PCR right now in Southeast Asia. The second is also that the incentive scheme along with it will allow for the right kind of investments in infrastructure to be able to allow participants to create more eco-design products. The third step for us would be that we have essentially new business models. I talked a bit about refill systems. We can also talk about concentrates, for example. The technologies here are improving a lot. How can we have the right regulatory framework that allows use of more concentrate products and refill systems in Thailand and other countries with a framework that allows acceleration of this process? And finally, I think it's important to include the informal sector and have the right transparency of data collection to the entire process of EPR. So in summary, if I may share our views, what we believe is that we have learned a lot in the process by making commitments voluntarily and going after them with rigor. In this process, we have learned a lot of things, both technically and infrastructure-wise. We are open to sharing our learnings with our partners and the ecosystem outside. In this case, there's nothing proprietary. It is how we can work together to make it bigger. The second part is that we need to come together. The EPR process is starting in most countries. It's a great opportunity for all of us together to drive it towards the right conclusion, which is investment in the infrastructure for collection and sorting and the right regulatory framework through eco-modulation. So those are our starting thoughts. Happy to take your questions. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Vivek. And so we have heard from a representative from SMEs and from larger multinational corporations about steps that they are taking to address the interlinkages between human rights, responsible business conduct across the different steps of the plastics cycle. And you spoke about the regulatory framework and how Unilever has taken a number of voluntary measures and has sought to move towards these with some vigor, but also that there is a need for minimum participation and perhaps moving beyond voluntary measures within the regulatory framework. And this is a theme that has come up a number of times throughout the forum. So now I'm going to turn to the colleagues on my right, and Nok. Coming from the Thailand Environment Institute Foundation and the work that you have done, the significant work that you have done in this field, how do you think businesses can incorporate due diligence processes and responsible supply chain management to enhance circularity in the plastic sector and to limit the impacts of plastic waste on vulnerable communities?
Thank you, Georgina, for the question, and good morning to my panel members here and the colleague in this conference room, and also hello to the participant from who participate at this event virtually. So before getting started, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Thailand Business Council for Sustainable Development, or TBCSD. TBCSD was established in 1993, almost 30 years ago, by Thailand leader on sustainable businesses. And we work on aiming to support the Thailand government on the implementing sustainable policy and also promote sustainable business practice among the members and also business sector in the country. TBCSD is secretariat by TEI, or Thailand Environment Institute, which is a non-profit, non-government organization. And TEI is also ranked among the world top think tank on environmental policy as well. So TEI has been provided secretariat support to TBCSD and implement TBCSD initiative. Currently, we have about 43 members companies in Thailand, and we also associate and work closely to enhance our impact by working with our collaborative partners, which include the Federation of Thai Industry, the Thailand Industry of Commerce, Stock Exchange of Thailand, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and also Thailand Greenhouse Gas Management Organization. So we try to work to maximize our impact with our partner in the country and also with the expert from around the world. And our initiative now is on climate change, plastic and electronic waste management. We also work on addressing biodiversity issue and PM2.5, which is air pollution that we're facing in Thailand, and it's impact the sustainability of the country. In addition, TBCSD also work with to engage youth in policy implementation and also policy development throughout our youth empowering initiative. So one of the examples that I would like to share regarding this value chain and then due diligence process that we integrated is will be under one of our initiative on PPP plastic. So PPP plastic in Thailand, which is a public-private partnership, was initiated in 2018 by TBCSD and also the Federation of Thai Industry. We have another set of about 40 members working together. You know, our members are the private sector who are the initial donors to provide funding and human resources to the project. And also we have the government partners, academic institute, and also organization and international organization as well. So through PPP Plastic, we try to help Thailand to address this sustainable plastic waste management. We also want to help Thailand reduce the marine plastic debris by 50% within 2030. So that is pretty ambitious goal. To do that, you know, we cover our work in terms of policy development. PPP Plastic has been actively engaged in the plastic roadmap development at the beginning. Everyone know in 2018, Thailand has announced a plastic roadmap, which we have a private sector and public-private organization involved in that. We also help with policy monitoring and evaluation as well, and the implementation. So we extend this network on the policy. We also try to create circular economy infrastructure model. So the government or responsible organization can see that this circular economy infrastructure can actually work in Thailand. And we work on awareness raising and education. We work on fundraising. We also funding to work on plastic project in Thailand. We also work on database as well, because it's very important to know what we achieve in terms of scientific based information. So those are the key area, and one of our the initiative that very ambitious as well, that we try to create a big city model. So we choose 2 big cities in Thailand, Rayong province and Bangkok. We initiate our work in Bangkok in Klong Toi district. So with this work, we actually need to work with stakeholders. I will give you example of the Rayong in detail. So we work with the local communities closely to see what are the pain points, what are the problems with the plastic waste, and then how they can solve that problem. And we also work with the private sector throughout the value chain to ensure that they can be involved in this solution as well. So end up from the first phase in Rayong, we able to create Rayong model, which aim to send zero plastic waste to landfill in Rayong within one small communities. And later on, we able to elaborate the funding from outsource and other sources, from international sources. So we able to expand this work within the province. And just actually yesterday, the Rayong model has been scaling up, lead up to another step to Rayong Less Waste project, which get funding from outsource. And then also we got all of the municipality in Rayong province involved in this. So we work with local community, coastal community, school, and even temple, local community to work together on this. And so far, I think we, with this small initiative, it's not big, compared with the 76 province in Thailand, but with this one province, we are able to now reduce bring about 900 kilogram of plastic waste back to the recycle system, and we link with the value chain so they can use this recycled plastic pellet and to produce upcycling products to be able to create a decent income for the community. And we also be able, some of our community members also be able to manage their debt from additional income from what we have helped them on this. So we are now scaling this up. We also have lessons learned from what we do to be able to make sure that this can be replicated and scaled up in other provinces or communities in Thailand too. So and I would like to conclude with just to re-emphasize that it's very important to engage all of the stakeholders. It can be majority or minority. They have to be involved so we can hear about the pain point, what they need, and then we can get ideas on how we can together approach and address some of the problems. So with that, I would like to thanks.
Thank you very much, Nak. And the points you discussed about working with stakeholders and involving rights holders to understand the implications of plastic waste on communities, working closely with communities in Rayong is really great example, and looking at how that can be scaled up across Thailand and what lessons can be learned for other countries in the region as well. You also mentioned the impacts of marine plastic debris and this ambitious target of reducing this by 15% by 2030. And that also connects very well to our next speaker, who is Dominique from the Environmental Justice Foundation, who also, through his work, works very closely with a multitude of stakeholders, looking at issues from marine plastic debris to other issues of plastics. And so, Dominique, I want to ask you, you work to build the capacity of rights holders who may be impacted by environmental harm. Could you share with us the proactive steps that businesses can take to avoid impacting on vulnerable communities?
Yeah, thank you very much, Georgina, for that introduction, and thank you for inviting me to this session. Sorry that I can't be there in person today. So I'm from the Environmental Justice Foundation, and we are an international organization that works around the world to protect natural environments, but also to campaign for the human rights of the people that depend on those natural environments. So we always try to see these two issues as very much interlinked and very difficult to separate them. So we work all around the world on a range of different environmental issues, including fisheries, ocean issues, blue carbon, and more recently on plastics as well. So in our experience in working in fisheries and looking at both the environmental issues surrounding unsustainable fishing, illegal fishing, but also human rights abuses in the fishing industry, we feel that we have quite a unique perspective where we've been analyzing this close interaction between environmental issues and the human rights sphere at the same time in these different industrial sectors. And a lot of what we've experienced and learned over the years can really be applied to the plastics value chain as well. So if we look at this close interaction between environmental harm caused by plastics and plastics pollution, but also the plastics value chain, and as some of our colleagues have already spoken about, how these workers who are involved in the landfill sector, but also in the recycling sector as well, can be coming into contact with dangerous chemicals and having to work in very difficult environments as well. And also talking about how businesses have this responsibility and talking about extended responsibility as well to deal with this plastic pollution and make sure that it isn't harming natural environments. So I think that's a really important discussion to be had. I think we've already touched on the need for supply chain due diligence, but I think really important to emphasize the need for transparency in supply chains as well. So making sure that businesses such as Unilever and other retailers and conglomerates in the West and other market states have visibility of plastics value chains and also what happens to the waste at the end of its life cycle as well. So we're really keen to explore how workplaces can be made more friendly in terms of human rights approaches. So making sure that workers have the opportunity to unionize. And we see that a really cost-effective method of doing this is allowing for the right to collective bargaining and freedom of association for workers working in the plastics waste sector. So supporting ILO Convention C87 and C98 is a really important step that governments and businesses and companies can take to ensure that workers can represent their rights and campaign for fairer working conditions and safer working conditions as well. So if we look at this issue of extended producer responsibility and apply it to our local context. So we have started this project, excuse me, called the Net Free Seas project here in Thailand. So we started this in 2020. And this project aims to put local communities directly in contact with businesses and recycling companies. So we work with over 100 communities now, all across Thailand, in all different provinces, from the Andaman Sea and Gulf of Thailand as well. And we connect them directly with companies such as Quali, Teamplas and Surplus as well. So these companies then can go to these communities, communicate directly with those communities, and engage in this consultation process to understand what are the pain points dealing with plastic waste, and then how can they collect the waste, how can they clean the waste, and then transport that to the companies as well. So it's really important that at each stage of that consultation, that engagement between the private sector and the communities, that there is this inclusivity and involvement in the decision-making process. And we feel that this is a really easy way that businesses can reduce environmental harm, but also improve the rights of these human rights holders as well in these coastal communities and indeed these vulnerable communities. So making sure that they're included in the process. And actually this can be a really, really cost-effective solution in the long run, which will help to reduce environmental harm, but also improve social and financial rights for those communities as well. And I would also note that a lot of these coastal communities, especially some of the communities that we work with in the Andaman Sea, we work with some Moken tribe communities, as Kunok was pointing out in provinces such as Ranong. And a lot of these communities have actually contributed the least to environmental harm in the first place. They have largely led a plastic-free lifestyle up until maybe the last 10 or 15 years. But a lot of the plastic waste that they are having to deal with on their beaches and choking their coral reefs and affecting their way of life isn't being produced by them. It's either coming from the mainland Thailand, or even from the region as well. So I think it's really important that businesses take that responsibility in hand and appreciate that they need to be working with local communities across the board. It's not just working with communities that are right on their doorstep, but making sure that the most vulnerable, the most impacted by environmental harm, such as plastic pollution, are included and brought to the table to engage in decision making as well. So I think, just to summarize really, net-free seas, where we are working with these local communities, collecting fishing nets that have been produced by larger industries and by commercial fishing vessels. We work with them directly to empower them to feel that they are part of the solution. So helping them to understand how to collect the nets, how to clean the nets, and then connecting them directly with businesses. And that whole process has to be transparent so that we have oversight. We allow the businesses to have oversight as well. So it allows them to engage in supply chain due diligence to make sure that these fishing nets are being collected ethically and that they're being cleaned sustainably as well, and making sure that the products that are being produced at the end of the day from these fishing nets can then be branded proudly with both their logo, but also with the Environmental Justice Foundation's logo as well, knowing full well that those products have been produced ethically, legally, and sustainably. So I might just pause there and looking forward to the discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dominique. And the examples that you provided really emphasize some of the points that Sarah was raising at the beginning of this session around procedural rights. You talked about freedom of association, participation of communities in decision making. And like Kunok, you spoke about how important it is for the private sector to engage directly with communities, with rights holders, to understand the pain points of plastic pollution and work with them to find long, durable solutions. I think it's also interesting how you raised a number of core environmental justice concerns about the fact that these communities that are being impacted by plastic pollution, particularly coastal communities, that pollution often has not come from those communities, and that there's issues of distributive environmental justice that need to be addressed, and how can the private sector engage in those issues as well. So moving from a focus on the ground, working directly with communities, we're now going to go back to the international scale again, because it's very important that the issues of plastic pollution and the human rights linkages with plastics are dealt with at all levels. And so our last speaker, Dr. Napan, I want to ask you about international environmental legal obligations of states with respect to plastic pollution, and particularly in the context of the right to a healthy environment, and how you think international legal obligations can potentially influence beyond governments, but influence businesses and the human rights space.
Thank you, Georgie. Good morning, everyone, distinguished panels and all the distinguished audience. Thank you for having me today. It's always a pleasure to serve the UN. And this is only my opinion alone. It's not representing my institutions. And I know that being a lawyer, I'm not alone, but listening to lawyers talk sometimes can be boring. So I'll expect myself to be as much entertaining as possible. But having listened to all the panelists today, it made me feel a bit nostalgic, simply because it's bring me back to my law school 15 years ago when we started discussing the relationship between human rights and environmental protections. And here you go today. This year we have an actual recognition of the rights of a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment. I think my task today that was assigned start from here, and how these newly recognized, but well, it's actually, we know it's for a long time, the actual connections between the two has been, how these would influence international environmental obligation and ultimately create impacts upon private sectors. I think when we read the resolution from the United Nations General Assemblies, not just only the recognitions of these particular rights that should be taken into account, but other, paragraphs in there as well. I think there are two observations that I think also worth mentioning. Firstly, the right to a clean and healthy environment is related to other rights as well in human rights. And I take it myself as to meaning that you cannot really promote or protect a right to a healthy environment without upholding or reaffirming other related rights. Right to life, right to food, right to adequate standards of living, right to water, so on and so forth. And more closer to our discussion today is the fact that these particular rights require full implementation of all multilateral environmental agreements and under the principle of international law. And I think these serve a very, very good foundation for the missing link for a long time and help perhaps at least give us some clue how to rectify deficit in international environmental law when it comes to enforcement. It has been criticized, at least since we talked more about environmental obligations, that it is very difficult to enforce, and it is even more difficult when someone commits wrongdoing with respect to international environmental obligation, and how we serve the justice in order to rectify the problems. From now on, since July, I think what is very important is that environmental protection, especially from plastic pollution, is not a matter of environmental law anymore, but it also concerns protection of us, protection of human rights. And this nexus between the two is important because it gives at least environmental right defenders around the world more options in order to play their influential roles in ensuring that international obligation is upheld. And we're talking about international environmental obligation. It's, of course, primarily based on states. States have to do things and here and there. But ultimately, it is us, private sectors, is individuals or corporations that really have to feel the pain from enforcing more obligation or trying to be ensured that we are not in violation of domestic law that has been transposed international obligations. I'll give you some examples for how perhaps this is my forecast on how state would act with respect to the recognition of rights of healthy environment when it makes an official connections with international environmental law. I think there are a wake-up call for states that has been reluctant or doesn't really understand the need to integrate environmental protections in other bits of their functions. Because from now on, states would have more stakeholders that will start to inspect and check to ensure that during their functions, there will be additional requirements to ensure that not just only about your primary functions, but there are environmental plus human rights in the equation that you have to ensure that by performing state functions, these also contributes to sustainable development and also ensure protection of human rights and at the same time environmental protection. And this is very the case for plastic pollutions, where it is everywhere, and especially when it's come to land-based origins. This is one of the most difficult tasks where there are scatters and different levels of actions taken by different government institutions. And you can expect perhaps more robust action for states that has been very proactive in trying to rectify this problem, because there are more justification on the catalogs of states in taking perhaps a more detailed measures in order to ensure, because it's give efficiency, then you take one measure, you can achieve more objective, not just only about protection of the environment, but also ensuring that human rights and right to a healthy environment is protected. There are perhaps more, for example, like in the context of CBD, given the fact that CBD itself is quite decentralized and requires national implementations, but these give an excellent boost to the state to improvise measures that can answer multiple objectives. You can expect more area-based management, where you can at the same time trying to protect health, right to water, or on the broader pictures, right to healthy environment, and at the same time provide biological conservations. Apart from that, I think there might be certain product standard, process standard that dealing with, prevention of plastic. Regimes that have less discussion perhaps with respect to plastic might start to discuss it even more. We're talking about the context of WHO perhaps where, microplastic can contaminate foods, and there might be more guidelines upon state and after all upon, those industry involved in dealing with this. There are issues about cross-border movements as well. Of course, we know that certain plastic is international movement of certain plastic goods has been regulated through Basel Convention and the synergies regimes. Heavy, perhaps, or a more constructive inspection surveillance with respect to transboundary movement might be done. And if to take this a little bit more pessimistic, I perhaps expect that because of the additional but valuable justification added here to the rights of the healthy environment, we might expect to see a little bit of a legal warfare here where there was more justification for a barrier to trade. I'm not saying that barrier to trade is justifiable, but there are an opportunity for state to take human rights plus environmental protections as a measures and create technical barrier to trade. And of course, it involves WTO. Movement of plastic can be as waste at the same time it can be as goods if it is for certain purposes. And these, one of the perhaps an area that perhaps require further explorations, either in academia or by practitioners in order to ensure that while we're trying to liberalize trade, but there's balance has been struck between the two competing interests. I think this is perhaps a general idea that I would like to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Napan. And so that concludes our panelists' interventions. And we do have some opportunity to take some questions and comments from the floor. You can either address a direct question to one of our panelists, or you are welcome to also make a general comment. I see a number of hands already, at least 4. So 5, 6. Okay, so we are going to start. I'll give the floor first to the gentleman in the middle from.
Thank you very much. My name is Florian Berneck. I'm for CECC in Vietnam, Central and Eastern European Chamber of Commerce, so representing smaller businesses from Europe acting here. And a lot of these businesses are dealing with environmental friendly products, also trying to reduce things, reduce packaging, reduce plastic. And this brings me to my question. I did not hear from any one of you how to reduce the amount. We just heard about how to make it nicer, how to recycle it, how to make some people doing something about recycling. And we all know that most of plastic recycling are fairy tales. So what's about the reduction? Because mainly the poor people or the poorer people and the majority in Asia are pushed into plastics. It doesn't matter, somebody, I think our last speaker was mentioning they are living in a plastic world. They are forced into not single-use plastic, low-quality plastic, kitchen appliances, whatever. You go in the countryside, wherever you want in Asia, you get rubbish plastic, kitchen appliances, toys. Toys, a big topic, which is totally out of our sight. We talk about the plastic bottles, that's a small section. And that's why smaller companies, which I'm representing here, would really love to get into the market with these sustainable products, which are very successful in Europe, but have no way to do this in Asia because of the market power of the big guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We'll take a few questions and then we'll come back to the panelists. So one over here.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Massimiliano from the Eurocham Cambodia. I would like to ask a question to Mr. Vivekanand of Unilever. Can you elaborate more how to include, you said inclusion of informal sector into your EPR policies. Can you elaborate more on that? First question. Second question is that actually the world is watching Unilever in terms of plastic because they are probably the biggest producer in the world of containers. And you are right, I didn't hear any reduction, but I also probably missed some action of Unilever in terms of using something different from plastic. There's also a more sustainable plastic, corn-derived plastic, or more biodegradable products rather than that. But when I go to the supermarket, I actually don't see it. I cannot buy. Thank you.
Thank you. Rocky, yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Rocky Guzman from the Asian Research Institute for Environmental Law. And my question is really more on the enabling conditions and governance and rights across the plastics value chain, especially since there are many policy developments across Southeast Asia right now. So focusing on the procedural environmental rights, which a lot of speakers have focused on, I have two very interrelated questions. First, on the procedural access to information rights. Now, this is a huge issue across Southeast Asian countries, especially in terms of waste pollution, potential waste crime, for example, or the environmental harms of industry in polluting and in coastal communities and local communities as well. But there is a huge barrier here because these information are usually considered proprietary or trade secrets. Now, what are the remedies or what are the immediate next steps that governments can do or governments can require to ensure that industry and businesses actually disclose these kinds of information? And this connects to my next question, which is access to remedy, which is one of the pillars of the guiding principles of the UN, right? So what are the remedies? I know there are remedies. We can go to courts for prosecution of perpetrators of crime, for example. But a lot of countries in Southeast Asia, for example, do not have that strong institutions as much, and it could be expensive as well. Now, are there low-hanging fruits for remedies where we can resort to, especially local communities and coastal communities, in terms of exacting accountability of perpetrators of crime, for example, waste crime, for example, or polluters, or just getting reparations for environmental harms that may be caused by industry? So these are two interrelated questions on procedural environmental rights and across as applied across the plastics value chain.
Thank you. We'll take one more, and then yes, at the back, and then we'll come back to the panelists.
ค่ะ สวัสดีค่ะ นารีวงศ์สายชนค่ะ Welcome to Thailand ค่ะ ดิฉันจากเครือข่ายชาวเลอันดามันนะคะ ก็อยู่ท่ามกลางขยะจากทั่วทุกทิศ เพราะว่ามันหลายคอมพานีมากในโลโก้ของบริษัท ซึ่งอยู่ในทะเลของอันดามันค่ะ ก็ไม่ใช่บริษัทเดียวแน่นอนในประเทศนี้ในโลกนี้ ซึ่งขยะเนี่ยไม่รู้หรอกว่ามาจากไหน แต่สิ่งที่เราถูกกระทำก็คือว่าเราถูกตีตราว่าเป็นผู้ทิ้งขยะค่ะ แล้วทีนี้เนี่ยถามว่าชาวเลเองเนี่ยมีศักยภาพในการที่จะสร้างโรงงานปิโตรเคมีไหมค่ะ ถ้าไม่มีผู้ผลิตไม่มีผู้ขายและไม่มีผู้ซื้อและก็ไม่มีผู้บริโภคค่ะเส้นทางของพลาสติกเหล่านี้เนี่ยมันมาจากเริ่มต้นที่ผลิตแล้วมาสู่พวกเราซึ่งเป็นชาติพันธุ์ที่อยู่ในท้องทะเลดำรงวิถีตามวิถีวัฒนธรรมดั้งเดิมการใช้เราอยู่อย่างมีความสุขเราสามารถที่จะดูแลคนอื่นได้เราสามารถที่จะช่วยเหลือบุคคลที่มาจากที่อื่นอย่างเป็นมิตรแต่ทุกวันนี้ด้วยสิ่งเหล่านี้เนี่ยที่ถูกตราว่าเป็นผู้ทำลายสิ่งแวดล้อมสิ่งเหล่านี้เนี่ยเราก็ชอกช้ำอยู่พอสมควรกับวาทกรรมที่เหมือนจะสวยงามกับคนอื่นแต่ว่ามันโหดร้ายกับพวกเราค่ะจากที่ฟังมานะคะก็ไม่เห็นการลดขยะเลยค่ะเป็นการหนุนเสริมในการช่วยเสริม ให้บริษัทเนี่ยผลิตมากขึ้นโดยผ่านกิจกรรมต่างๆเราช่วยกันเก็บนะช่วยกันอนุรักษ์นะช่วยกันดูแลบ้านเมืองนะช่วยกันดูแลทรัพยากรช่วยกันดูแลขยะให้มันน้อยลงแต่ว่าสิ่งเหล่านี้เนี่ยเป็นการเสริมให้กับบริษัทต่างๆเนี่ยผลิตมากขึ้นแค่เป็นต้นทานว่าแค่บอกว่านี่นะเป็นการเยียวยาเป็นการดูแลเป็นการให้คืนกับสังคมแต่ใช่หรือเปล่ามันใช่หรือเปล่าหรือว่าเราเป็นส่วนหนึ่งในการส่งเสริมให้สิ่งเหล่านี้เนี่ยให้ขยะมากขึ้นค่ะแค่นี้ค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the panel, and if we have time, we'll take another round of comments and questions. So I'll ask Vivek, would you like to respond first?
Thank you for the questions. Actually, I think I did refer to this in my talk. Maybe it wasn't clear enough. Let me elaborate a bit on how we are trying to reduce plastic usage by design. So as I mentioned earlier, our objective is to reduce our virgin plastic consumption by at least 50% by 2025. Our program is called Less Plastic, Better Plastic, and No Plastic, which essentially means we will reduce plastic by design, for example, by lightweighting or using alternates to plastic, or by using refill systems where possible, or encouraging the use of refill systems to totally bring down the footprint of plastic used in our chain. The second part of that is also to design systems using higher content of recycled plastic. So between the two, we hope to reduce the content of virgin plastic that we use. The second part, in terms of the inclusion of the informal sector, I think there's a value to bring the informal sector who's already collecting, for example, junk shops. Kun Nat talked about the Trash Lucky company that's getting informal sector integrated using technology and collection points. If we can get the right data transparency and the right access to materials collected by the informal sector, in the end, our objective is to make sure the collection happens and then there's highest value to the recycled plastic that's created. And that's where I think integrating the informal sector in the EPR will also help. I hope that answered the questions, and I'd be happy to chat with you after to take any further detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek. Now I want to give the floor to Nok to respond.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I will actually cover the two questions on the reduction of plastic, and then also the point that Kun Naralin Saichon has been raised. For PPP plastic, TEI, my organization is not a private sector, but we help private sector, TBCSD, to work together and to see where the support is needed, where there are the gaps. So we try to address the problem. And as I mentioned, as we establish this PPP plastic, because we think it's a national agenda that everyone have to really focus on and helping. So we work on the top down, we work on policy development. We take consultation process among the policy makers and also our partners that work directly with the community to see where the problem is and also how we can address the problem. And we work, as I mentioned, in some of the projects, as example, we work directly with the community who are facing the problem as well. And then from the bottom up, we also work with the community to see the pain points and see how we can address that. And then along with that, we also work on the policy advocacy and education through two main channels. First one is on through our project activities when we work, and then we also create a national campaigns on how to reduce plastic. So the reduction, the 3R, main part of this solution are always integrated in every part of our communication. And to develop policy and changing Thai behavior, our problem is on the reduction and segregation as well. So to change the people behavior, it cannot happen overnight. It takes time. It takes time to communicate, to create the right understanding and set up the common goal that we all can achieve together. So, and I believe, with the commitment of the stakeholder in the country and also the force that we receive from outside, there are global policy, there are even some commercial and economic measures that have been put in place around the world to actually frame us, kind of shape us to the more sustainable direction with less plastic. But we also have to accept that plastic is also very critical in some part of our livelihood. So it's the matter of how we can minimize the use of it, and then also sustainably manage it after use to create the less environmental impact, and then also be able to grow, and then the livelihoods of people can also be able to include in that. So it's the balancing of the social, environmental, and economic. So that's what I would like to add.
Thank you, Nok. I want to now give the floor to Dominique to reply.
Thank you very much. Yes, I think some great questions there, especially focusing on this issue of reducing plastic waste and consumption in the first place. And I think that this is really where government policy, not just in Thailand, but across the region, needs to step in to ensure that whether it's industrial waste or individual waste or business waste can be effectively measured and then collected according to the total volume that's being created. So trying to move away from flat set charges for collection of waste to a weight-based system, so that if industry or businesses are creating a lot of waste, then they are charged more for their waste collection. And I think that's a kind of simple policy measure can be implemented at the municipal level, city level, or national level as well. And that can help to promote better behavior in terms of behavior change towards reducing the actual production of waste and consumption of single-use plastics in the first place. And I think moving on to Rocky's questions as well, how can we help local communities and these vulnerable communities to identify waste dropping crimes and things like that? I think it really can boil down to improved monitoring and community-based monitoring, like Nok was talking about as well. So giving these communities the tools to be able to report on these crimes themselves. And that's something that we've done in the fisheries sphere. So if there are instances of illegal fishing, then we can give communities cameras and basic training to identify those kinds of crimes. And the same principles can be applied to waste crimes as well. So I think it's all about better reporting, better monitoring of these crimes, and better transparency of plastic pollution and those plastic waste supply chains as well. And I think just one really good example about that and how improved monitoring can facilitate better awareness and action is air pollution. If we look at the issue of air pollution now in Bangkok and other cities in Thailand, we can see that having all of these monitors, having this better access to information for the general public can actually boost awareness and can boost advocacy efforts to try and address air pollution in our major cities. So I think similar lessons can be learned there to improve better monitoring efforts of plastic waste and plastic waste creation.
Thank you, Dominique. I'm going to hand the floor to Nat, but quickly before I do, I want to throw another question into the mix that we've received online, which is, how does the private sector ensure its supply partners or its supply chain for subsidiary or main parts are complicit in dealing with trash, recycling and packaging from point of origin through transit points to the point of destination? So just add that question in there, and if anyone wants to respond to that. But I'll give the floor first to Nat.
Thank you, Georgie. And the first question I would like to respond is about the reduction. So Trash Lucky's position in the supply chain is collect and aggregate, but we engage directly with consumers. So with every recycling program that we do, whether it's for office, for residential programs like condominiums, residential communities, and especially important, the school, we always teach people about 3 R's. We always say reduction or reducing is the best of the 3 R's. We always educate people about the theory versus practice of recycling. In theory, most plastic can be recycled, but in practice, very little plastic can be recycled, or gets recycled, I'm sorry. So for example, even if we talk about PET, only at least in Thailand, plastic PET bottles are the only one in the PET categories that gets recycled, but like PET packaging such as food wrapping or food, clam, what's it called, like clam shell packaging do not get recycled, for example, or even like PP, which is made out of straws, or it's used to make straws, that doesn't get recycled. So we always teach people about that. And second thing that we do to caution is that since we are incentivizing people to recycle, we always watch out for the unintended effect. We don't want people to consume more to try to win prizes. So we watch out for those data. And luckily, we haven't had that happen yet. And in fact, the opposite happened. People actually came to us and say, hey, for the first time, I now realize how much plastic I'm using. And so I'm going to look for ways to reduce, which is not that great for our business, but it's good for our mission to incentivize people to recycle and divert materials away from the environment. And then second, I just want to add a comment about bioplastic. So I think it's still fairly new, and there's not much regulation here. And consumers, at least like people that interact with our brands, they talk to us and they say, hey, they expect that if they hear bioplastic, they put it in their backyard and it will compost, and that's actually not true. It's very different from home compostable packaging, but that's what the perception of the public is. And also the informal waste collector that we work with, they don't really understand that packaging yet and how to sort and where that goes, especially like if there's no good regulation on labeling. The other day, I actually found a microwavable food tray that has two labels together. One is the recycling symbol PP, code 5, and it also say on the other side, 100% biodegradable, which is actually not true. So that's just one caution about how do we deal with bioplastic and making sure that it actually gets compost. We don't have the industrial compost facility in Thailand, really. Thank you.
Sure. Quick stab at the other one.
Thank you. Yes, so we only have, well, we're a little bit over time. So if you allow me, Vivek, do you want to take a minute or so to answer that one? And then I want to give Napon 2 minutes to also respond. And then we will close the session.
It's a very good question on the extended supply chain. As I mentioned earlier, we see extended producer responsibility as extended participant responsibility. Everybody has a value contribution in the chain, and everybody has a responsibility in the chain. So for example, retailers could participate by offering retail shops to be collection points and integrate in the larger infrastructure. That's one way of involving the retailers. When I talk about converters, a lot of our partner converters are developing technologies for recyclable materials, or for materials that can use higher content of recycled plastic. They have a value to add in the chain in terms of circularity. And also primary resin manufacturers as well are getting into more management of recycled plastic and setting up infrastructure. For example, in Thailand, we're creating RHDP or RPET solutions. So I think across the value chain, based on the expertise levels and the contribution in the value chain, we can find different solutions. And I do agree that everybody has a role to play, and we believe that an integrated EPR involving everybody would be ideal. Thank you.
Thank you, Vivek. Napon, the last words.
Yep, I really like the question about reductions, because they seem to be missing from the bigger picture, even at the international levels. I think when we're talking about plastic circularities, we usually also talk about circular economy at the same time, but we have to be really cautious when we're talking about circular and ensure that it is really circular, because indeed, when we're talking about circular economy or anything surrounding that, we seem to neglect that the tap have never been closed. And indeed, that is the production bits, and it is pretty much talking about design, but we are not really have an actual target for reduction. And that seems to be quite a concern, at least out there in literature as well. And we have to ensure that we have to make it really circular and have an actual target. At least we expect something, hopefully, in the international negotiation for the new plastic treaty, that we have these kind of targets as well. In ASEAN, I've been vocal for this for quite several years, that there were no common environmental policy in these regions, that who form the kind of target together. But that would really something that is really needed to ensure that the circularity of plastic happens, circular economy happen, and we will be a cleaner region. And of course, as other panelists mentioned, it is really a political wheels in these countries. And of course, that would take lots of bargaining issues, lots of lobbies in order to come up with a target for reduction. But there are no other way if we are to change or to rectify these, pollutions. So I guess someone have to pay, and if no one pay, all of us have to pay, I guess. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you so much. I want to thank all of our panelists. Thank you, Dominique and Sarah, for joining us remotely. Thank you, Nat, Vivek. Thank you, Nok and Napon, for all of your insights and your expertise throughout this panel. Thank you to all of the participants for your comments and your questions and for joining us during this session.